Catherine Baker, welcome.
Great to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me.
You got elected in a true swing district where Democrats outnumber Republicans. Why do you think voters chose you over the Democrat, Tim Cibrandi? What kind of message were they sending?
Well, I think they were sending a message that a lot of voters throughout California can relate to, and that is one where they don't want someone who is necessarily party line, didn't want any more of the same powers that be that already have a pretty strong voice in Sacramento. They wanted a little more balance and independence, and that's something that I focused on in my race from the very beginning. They also wanted to see those who are focused on the issues much more intensely that are important to the district, like education and transportation and jobs in California, stay focused on them, and I think that's why.
So what's your top priority going to be? Would you say one or two?
Well, the one or two top priorities are what the voters in my district really talked with me about during the campaign: education and a pro-job climate in California. We can really be doing better in both.
I know that you were a big supporter of the Vergara decision, which took aim at teacher tenure. Do you intend to go up to Sacramento and try to promote legislation that would reform teacher tenure?
Well, sure. I do think and there was a lot of support in my district for it, I do think there's support for reforming teacher tenure system, particularly focusing on how to reward and provide professional development for good teachers, and there's an awful lot of them, but also make it easier to have teachers have lifelong professional development, which the tenure system suppresses, makes it very spotty.
So, of course, Democrats are in charge up in Sacramento. They have not a two-thirds majority anymore, but there are a lot of Democrats in both houses. The governor, of course, is a Democrat. How are you, to get anything done, you know, you're going to have to work with Democrats. So sure. Where do you see that common ground?
Well, it starts with, I think, the way I ran my race, which is to get bipartisan support. I think that's an indication of how I would intend to work with others in the Capitol. So it starts with building relationships as well with those across the aisle who share the same priorities and interest in improvement in education and the job climate, and there are a lot. I think there's actually great opportunity for reforms in education that are supported across the aisle.
Who's the first Democrat you called after you won?
Well, you know what? There were some local leaders in the area that I thanked for their support and endorsement. Also heard from Newell Ornerich, who is one of my primary opponents, and was glad to be in touch with him quickly. So I focused on the local, and I've already had an opportunity to meet my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Evan Lowe from the Silicon Valley area, and my in-laws are in his district, so I know he's going to work hard to serve well.
Yeah. So you're being described as a fresh face. You're the first Republican to get elected in the Bay Area in, I think, 8 years. What does that mean to you? I mean, what does it mean to be a break-the-mold Republican?
Well, it starts with what you believe in, and I'm a Catherine Baker Republican, as I say, and I think that's one that matches my district very well. It's a fiscally conservative district, does like to see smart decisions made in Sacramento, and so it also means focusing on what voters in my community expect. And again, not necessarily just talking points from the party establishment or leadership, working cooperatively with them, but making sure I'm putting the voters first.
And you're more liberal on social issues, I would say.
That's how I'm sometimes described. I just think it's a good match with my district.
So one of the things that is in the news, of course, is immigration reform. The National Republican Party says the president, what he did this week was unconstitutional. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do have a great respect for our constitutional structure, particularly the separation of powers and the role that Congress makes in writing laws and the president makes in the collaborative process by signing them. I do think the process is wrong. I don't think this is what's fitting the right tone for what we need to do. And I do think some of the policies that the president is looking at are exactly the ones that need to be looked at and reviewed. But I don't think the process is right. It's not a good tone for bipartisanship going forward.
Do you think it was unconstitutional?
I do. I certainly do think the president's ability to just make law is something that he's gone down that path. Even he agreed with that several years ago when he said, I don't have the authority to do this.
He was against it before he was for it.
It's a bit like that. But I hope that in Washington, we really do need to see a better tone and cooperation and immigration reforms where it's needed the most.
You know, in California, we're going in the opposite direction as some of the country, especially with undocumented immigrants. We've made life more normal. Starting in January, undocumented immigrants will be able to get driver's licenses. Do you support that kind of legislation? For example, expanding health care to include undocumented immigrants in California?
Well, my overall approach when it comes to immigration and including undocumented immigrants is as long as the state's not talking out of both sides of its mouth and saying that some things are legal and some things are not, and trying to get ahead of the federal government. That's usually where we end up paying for it in the courts through costly legislation and costly litigation. That's where I would look for the state of California not to be focusing. It is a federal issue, and we have the largest California delegation. The California delegation, excuse me, is the largest one in Sacramento and in Washington. That's what we need to focus on lobbying.
Just quickly, because it may come up when you're in Sacramento, are you for or against high-speed rail?
I'm a strong opponent of the high-speed rail project the governor has been pushing, and it's one where we need to completely change to give voters a chance to reconsider.
All right, Catherine Baker, thanks so much for coming in. Congratulations.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.